lawyer. What's the most scandalous courtroom confession that shocked everyone? Story 1. I was working as a defense attorney on a seemingly straightforward DUI case. My client, a middle-aged man, had been pulled over and failed a breathalyzer test. He insisted he wasn't drunk, just exhausted after a long shift at work. But as we neared the trial date, he suddenly called me and said, "I need to tell you something." In court, the prosecutor presented the evidence. Security footage of him stumbling out of a bar, the breathalyzer reading, and the officer's testimony. My client, however, took the stand and, without prompting, blurted out, "I wasn't drunk. I was poisoned." The courtroom went silent. He went on to explain that his wife had been drugging him for months to make him look like an alcoholic, setting him up to lose custody of their children. At first it sounded absurd, but toxicology reports confirmed the presence of sedatives in his system, ones not found in alcohol. His wife, who was in the courtroom, turned pale. A follow-up investigation proved she had been slipping substances into his drinks. The case took a shocking turn. My client was acquitted, and his wife was later charged with attempted poisoning. The entire courtroom was left in stunned silence. Story 2. This was a civil case where a wealthy businessman was suing his former assistant for theft. The assistant had allegedly stolen thousands of dollars from the company's petty cash, and the evidence seemed damning: bank transfers, receipts, even a confession to HR. But then, during cross-examination, the assistant suddenly burst into tears and screamed, "I took the money because he forced me to have an abortion." The room froze. The judge's gavel slammed down to restore order. The assistant continued, claiming the businessman had been having an affair with her, got her pregnant, and then pressured her into an abortion, promising her financial support that never came. When she asked for help, he framed her for theft. The businessman's face went completely white. His wife, sitting behind him, got up and stormed out of the courtroom. The judge called for a recess, and after a week, the businessman dropped the case. But his reputation? Completely destroyed. Story 3. I was sitting in on a murder trial as a junior associate when the defendant, a seemingly timid woman, took the stand. She was accused of killing her abusive husband, but the prosecution argued it was premeditated, claiming she had taken out a large life insurance policy just months prior. The whole trial was filled with horrific details of her husband's abuse, but nothing prepared us for what she confessed on the stand. "I didn't kill him because of the abuse," she admitted, her voice eerily calm. "I killed him because he was planning to kill my sister." She went on to reveal that her husband had been blackmailing her sister for years and had finally decided to get rid of her. She found out about his plan the night before it happened. Instead of calling the cops, because she feared they wouldn't believe her, she waited until he fell asleep and smothered him with a pillow. The courtroom was dead silent. Even the prosecution seemed shaken. In the end, she was convicted of manslaughter instead of first-degree murder. But the revelation that she had essentially confessed to a crime to prevent another one was the most chilling moment I've ever seen. Story 4. A bitter divorce case. Husband and wife were fighting over everything: money, property, even their dog. The wife accused the husband of being unfaithful, while the husband countered that she was manipulative and controlling. It was a standard ugly split, until the husband took the stand and, in a cold, flat voice, confessed, "I never cheated on you, but I know you did." The wife's face dropped. The judge raised an eyebrow. The husband's lawyer seemed caught off guard. "You think I didn't know about the pool guy? The personal trainer? My own brother?" Gasps echoed through the court. The wife tried to compose herself, but her face turned red. The husband pulled out a flash drive, handing it to his attorney. "I had a pee. I follow you for 6 months. Everything is on there. You lied about me, tried to take my money, and now I want full custody of our kids." The case took a complete 180. The wife's attorney requested an immediate recess, and a few weeks later she quietly settled, giving up primary custody and taking a much smaller financial settlement than she originally fought for. The kicker? The brother part wasn't a bluff. That evidence was the final nail in her case. Story 5. This case was about a hit-and-run accident that left a young woman in a coma. The defendant, an elderly man, insisted he wasn't driving, but his car was found at the scene, heavily damaged. His grandson swore under oath that he had borrowed the car that night and was the real culprit. It seemed like a tragic but simple case. Then, out of nowhere, the prosecutor pulled out security footage from a traffic cam. It showed the elderly man clearly behind the wheel. The grandson's face turned white. Before the judge could even react, the grandson stood up and shouted, "I was just trying to protect him. He has dementia. He doesn't even remember hitting her." The courtroom erupted. The grandfather, confused, kept shaking his head, denying everything. The grandson sobbed, saying he didn't want his grandfather to go to prison because he didn't even realize what he had done. The judge called for an immediate medical evaluation. It turned out the grandfather did have advanced dementia and was unaware of the incident. The court eventually ruled that he was unfit to stand trial, and he was placed in a care facility instead of prison. The grandson was charged with obstruction of justice but received a light sentence due to his intentions. It was heartbreaking. The victim eventually recovered, but the weight of that courtroom moment still lingers with Story 6. This case was about a seemingly simple workplace injury claim. A man sued his employer, claiming he had fallen from a faulty ladder and sustained severe back injuries that left him unable to work. He provided medical records, testimony from coworkers, and even a doctor's note confirming his condition. The trial was going smoothly for him, until the defense pulled up security footage. On the video, just a few days after the supposed injury, the man was seen carrying multiple heavy bags of cement at a home improvement store, moving with no sign of pain. Gasps filled the court. His own lawyer put his head in his hands. The judge looked over and asked, "Would you like to revise your statement?" At that moment, instead of admitting he had faked the injury, the man doubled down and said, "That's my twin brother." The problem? He didn't have a twin brother. The courtroom burst into laughter, and the judge dismissed the case on the spot. He was later charged with fraud. Story 7. A quiet, elderly woman was on trial for the murder of her wealthy husband. The prosecution claimed she had poisoned him over money, but her defense painted her as a loving wife who had no reason to kill him. Then, on the last day of the trial, she suddenly took the stand and calmly said, "I didn't kill him for money. I killed him because he killed my sister 40 years ago, and I finally had proof." Stunned silence. The judge actually asked her to repeat herself. She went on to explain that her husband had always been a suspect in her sister's disappearance decades earlier, but there had been no evidence. Then, after his death, she found an old hidden box in their attic. Inside was her sister's necklace, blood-stained, along with a diary where her husband detailed how he made sure she'd never be found. Overcome with rage, she poisoned his drink the same night. The courtroom was in shock. Despite the revelation, she was still convicted, but even some jury members later admitted they understood why she did it. Story 8. A man was on trial for breaking into a wealthy couple's home and stealing jewelry worth over $200,000. The prosecution had security footage showing him inside the house, and he was found with some of the stolen items in his possession. But then, when asked to testify, he casually said, "I didn't steal anything. I was just getting my stuff back." Confused, the lawyer pressed him further, and he admitted that the man he robbed was actually his biological father, who had abandoned him and his mother when he was a baby. His mother had later died in poverty while his father built a fortune. When he tracked his father down and demanded answers, the father laughed in his face. So the man decided to take what was rightfully his. The court didn't buy his justification and he was convicted. But the father's wife, who had no idea about his past, left the courtroom looking absolutely horrified. Story 9. It was a messy divorce case. The wife accused the husband of domestic abuse, while the husband claimed she was lying to take everything from him. She showed medical records, photos of bruises, and even texts where he threatened her. It looked like an easy win. Then, the husband's lawyer pulled out a surprise piece of evidence, a hidden camera recording from their home. The video showed the wife hitting herself in the face, staging the bruises, and typing the threatening messages from her husband's phone to her own. The courtroom was stunned. The judge immediately halted proceedings and ordered an investigation. The wife was later arrested for perjury, and the husband was granted full custody of their children. I've never seen a case turn so fast in real time. Story 10. A seemingly normal fraud trial turned into something out of a crime thriller. The defendant was an accountant accused of embezzling millions from his company. His defense? He was framed. The prosecution had records showing the money was transferred into his personal accounts, and even testimonies from co-workers who suspected him. The case seemed closed. Then, right in the middle of trial, he stood up and screamed, "You want the truth? I laundered the money for the mob." The entire courtroom went silent. Even the judge was momentarily speechless. He went on to reveal that he had been forced into laundering for a criminal organization, and when he tried to stop, they threatened his family. The people who framed him were actually his mob contacts, making it look like he had pocketed the money instead. Law enforcement quickly got involved. The case was put on hold and federal agents took over. The last I heard, he was put into witness protection in exchange for testifying. Definitely the wildest case I've ever seen unfold. Story 11. A routine paternity case took an unexpected jaw-dropping turn when the mother, who was suing a wealthy businessman for child support, took the stand. She had presented DNA evidence proving he was the father, and he had denied it the entire time. He was confident, almost smug, until the mother broke down in court and confessed, "He's not just the father of my child. He's my father, too. The courtroom went dead silent. The businessman's face turned a sickly shade of white. As it turned out, the man had lived a double life, having an affair with a much younger woman decades ago. He had abandoned her before she gave birth to a daughter, who grew up never knowing who her real father was. Years later, without realizing it, she met and got involved with the same man. It was the most horrifying revelation I'd ever seen in a courtroom. The businessman refused to say another word. The judge had to call a recess just to let everyone process what had happened. The lawsuit was quickly settled out of court after that. Story 12. During a high-profile drug trafficking trial, a mid-level dealer was on the stand, denying all involved. The prosecution had wiretaps, witness testimony, and financial records tying him to the operation, but he kept insisting he was innocent. Then, the lead prosecutor casually asked him, "Is it true that you've never handled any shipments yourself?" "That's right," the defendant said confidently. The prosecutor smirked, pulled out a file, and said, "Then why do we have your fingerprints all over 30 kilos of cocaine in an intercepted shipment?" The defendant froze. His lawyer tried to intervene, but then, completely panicked, he blurted out, "Because I only package the stuff, I don't sell it." Gasps rippled through the court. His own lawyer put his head in his hands. The judge had to pause the trial because the defendant had just unknowingly confessed to being part of the operation. Needless to say, he was convicted. Story 13. This was a tragic wrongful death lawsuit. A woman was suing a major hospital after her husband, a healthy 35-year-old, had died during a routine surgery. The hospital claimed it was a rare complication, an unavoidable risk of the procedure. The case was almost over when the surgeon himself was unexpectedly called to testify. He looked shaken as he took the stand. Then, out of nowhere, he admitted, "I made a mistake. I operated on the wrong patient." The courtroom erupted. Even his own lawyers were horrified. The surgeon went on to explain that a clerical error had mixed up the charts. Instead of performing a minor, simple procedure, he had done a completely unnecessary and highly invasive surgery, leading to the patient's death. The hospital had been covering it up, trying to blame complications, rather than admitting the truth. That confession ended the trial immediately. The hospital settled for millions, and the surgeon lost his license. Story 14. A man was on trial for the murder of his estranged wife. The prosecution painted him as an abusive husband who had snapped, while the defense argued that he was being framed. The turning point came when the man decided to testify. He was calm, collected, and then, in the middle of cross-examination, he looked at the prosecutor and said, "You think I killed her?" But I know who did." The entire courtroom went silent. He then named his wife's own brother as the killer. He claimed his wife had been planning to turn her brother in for a financial scam, and he had killed her to stop her. The defense had no evidence for this claim until the prosecutor suddenly turned pale. As it turned out, new forensic evidence had just come in that morning, linking the brother to the crime scene. The trial was paused, the brother was investigated, and days later he was arrested. The husband? Fully acquitted. Story 15. This case was about a woman accused of setting her house on fire to collect insurance money. She had denied everything, claiming it was an electrical fault. But then, her own daughter, who was supposed to testify in her defense, got on the stand and said, "Mom, I saw you pour the gasoline." The courtroom froze. The mother's lawyer tried to object, but the girl, who was only 12, started crying and said, "You told me we'd get a new house. You said we'd be rich." The mother turned pale and started shaking her head. It was clear she hadn't expected her daughter to betray her. The trial was effectively over at that moment. She was convicted, and the daughter was placed in protective custody with relatives. The saddest part? The fire had almost killed the girl too. If she hadn't woken up in time, she wouldn't have been alive to testify. Story 16. A man was on trial for assaulting his neighbor over a property dispute. The prosecution painted him as aggressive and violent, while the defense claimed he had been provoked. Then, mid-trial, the defendant suddenly stood up and yelled, "I didn't just hit him. I buried his dog, too." The room went dead silent. The judge demanded clarification. The man, now visibly furious, pointed at the alleged victim and said, "Tell them what you did to my son's dog. Tell them how you poisoned it and laughed about it." The prosecutor tried to regain control, but the defendant pulled out his phone and showed messages from the neighbor gloating about getting rid of the dog. The judge ordered an immediate investigation. Turns out the neighbor had poisoned the dog, and it completely changed the tone of the case. While the defendant was still guilty of assault, his sentence was significantly reduced, and the neighbor faced animal cruelty charges. Story 17. A woman was on trial for embezzling nearly $1 million from her employer. She had been the company's trusted accountant for years, and her defense was that she had been framed. Everything changed when, during questioning, she suddenly sighed, looked at the jury and said, "Fine, I took the money, but only because he made me." She then pointed to the CEO sitting at the prosecution's table. The courtroom was in shock. She went on to explain that the CEO had been skimming money for years and forced her to create fake accounts to hide it. When the company started looking into missing funds, he pinned everything on her. At first, it seemed like a desperate lie until the prosecution's own forensic accountant started looking into her claims. By the end of the trial, the CEO was being investigated, and the case against the accountant took a drastic turn. She still faced charges, but so did the man who had framed her. Story 18. A woman was testifying in her divorce trial, claiming that her husband had been cheating on her with her best friend. She provided hotel receipts, texts, and even private investigator footage. The husband, looking absolutely defeated, finally leaned forward and mumbled, "I cheated, but not with her." His lawyer visibly cringed. The wife, confused, demanded, "Then with who?" After a long pause, he quietly admitted, "With your brother." Gasps. The judge actually had to call for order because the wife lost it, screaming and trying to throw things. The trial ended with an immediate divorce settlement because there was nothing left to fight over after that revelation. Story 19. A teenager was on trial for arson after a fire destroyed his high school gym. The evidence was mostly circumstantial, and he insisted he had nothing to do with it. But then, during cross-examination, the prosecutor casually asked, "So, where were you when the fire started?" The teen, smug and confident, said, "I was tagging the back wall of the school. I wasn't even inside." His own lawyer looked like he wanted to disappear. The teen had just confessed to another crime while trying to prove his innocence. The judge had to pause the trial because everyone, including the jury, was trying not to laugh. The arson charges were eventually dropped due to lack of evidence, but he still got hit with vandalism charges. Story 20. A man was on trial for defrauding multiple elderly victims out of their life savings. The prosecution had stacks of evidence, but he kept denying everything, claiming he was a legitimate financial advisor. Then, out of nowhere, one of the victims, a frail, elderly woman, stood up and yelled, "Where's my money, you lying son of a—" Or she? Before anyone could stop him, the defendant laughed and said, "Oh, you're still alive? I thought you'd be dead by now." The entire courtroom went completely silent. Even his own lawyer looked horrified. That one comment sealed his fate. The jury convicted him in record time, and the judge showed no mercy in sentencing. Story 21. A husband and wife were in court battling over custody of their children. The wife accused the husband of being an unfit parent, claiming he was emotionally abusive and had a drinking problem. The husband, in return, accused her of being manipulative and fabricating evidence. It was a bitter fight, but things took a shocking turn when the husband, looking exhausted, suddenly said, "You want to talk about who's unfit? Tell them about the nanny." The wife's face turned ghost white. The judge asked for clarification, and the husband explained, "She's been sleeping with our nanny for the past 2 years. And that's not even the worst part." He pulled out a folder and handed it to his lawyer. Inside were texts, explicit photos, and, worst of all, proof that the wife had been secretly planning to run away with the nanny and take the kids to another country. The courtroom was in stunned silence. The wife's lawyer immediately asked for a recess, but the damage was done. The judge ruled in favor of the husband, granting him full custody while the wife sat there, completely defeated. Story 22. A seemingly simple shoplifting case turned into something out of a crime thriller. A young woman had been caught stealing an expensive watch from a luxury store. She claimed she had been framed, but security footage showed her slipping the watch into her bag. Then, in the middle of her testimony, she suddenly said, "I wasn't stealing the watch. I was trying to leave a message." The entire courtroom looked confused. She then explained that the watch belonged to her father, who had been murdered years ago. The store owner had been his business partner, and she had spent years gathering evidence that he was the one behind her father's disappearance. The watch, she claimed, had a secret engraving her father had left as a clue. The courtroom was in shock. The judge allowed the watch to be examined, and sure enough, there was a hidden engraving with a date, the same date her father had gone missing. The shoplifting charges were quickly dropped as police reopened an old murder case. Story 23. A woman was suing a plastic surgeon for malpractice, claiming he had botched her facelift and left her permanently disfigured. She had presented medical records, expert testimony, and even photos of the alleged damage. But then, right before closing arguments, the surgeon's lawyer stood up and asked the judge for permission to present new evidence. The judge allowed it, and the lawyer pulled up recent social media photos of the woman, taken just days before the trial. In the pictures, she looked flawless. No scarring, no disfigurement. She had even bragged about how beautiful she looked. The courtroom gasped. The woman's own lawyer looked horrified. The judge asked her directly, "Is this you?" She had no choice but to admit it. The case was immediately thrown out, and she was later charged with attempted fraud. Story 24. A man was on trial for attempting to rob a bank. The prosecution had security footage showing him inside, wearing a mask and holding a gun. His defense? He insisted he wasn't actually robbing the place. The courtroom was skeptical, but then he calmly said, "I wasn't there to steal money. I was there to find my wife's lover." Confused, the judge allowed him to explain. He claimed his wife had been cheating on him with a bank employee. He had found out and decided to confront the man. The gun, he claimed, wasn't even loaded. It was just for intimidation. The prosecution immediately pointed out that he had still committed armed robbery, but the defense argued that his intent wasn't theft. The most shocking part? The supposed lover admitted on the stand that he had, in fact, been sleeping with the man's wife. The jury still found him guilty, but he was sentenced to a much lighter punishment than expected. Story 25. A murder trial was wrapping up. A man was accused of killing his business partner over a financial dispute. The evidence was overwhelming. DNA, security footage, even a recorded argument just hours before the murder. It seemed like an open and shut case. Then, during sentencing, the man suddenly laughed and said, "You all think I killed him for money? I killed him because he killed my sister." The courtroom went dead silent. The judge, taken aback, asked for clarification. The defendant explained that years ago, his sister had gone missing. He had always suspected his business partner but never had proof. Then, just days before the murder, he found a hidden folder on the victim's computer full of photos of his sister, including one of her body. Overcome with rage, he had confronted the man and killed him. The courtroom was in complete shock. The judge delayed sentencing to allow investigators to verify his claims. A few weeks later, it was confirmed the victim had, in fact, been responsible for his sister's disappearance. Despite this revelation, the defendant was still convicted of murder, but his sentence was dramatically reduced. Story 26. A quiet inheritance dispute turned into a courtroom bombshell when an elderly man's children were fighting over his estate. The man had passed away, leaving behind a fortune, but the will was mysteriously changed just months before his death, favoring his new, much younger wife. The children argued that she had manipulated their father, while she claimed he had changed the will out of love. Then, out of nowhere, the family's longtime housekeeper stood up from the gallery and shouted, "Tell them the truth, you liar! You were already married." Gasps filled the courtroom. The wife turned pale. The judge, intrigued, asked for clarification. The housekeeper revealed that the woman had never actually divorced her first husband and had married the elderly man under a fake identity. The courtroom erupted. Investigators quickly pulled records, and sure enough, the woman was still legally married to someone else. Not only was the will invalidated, but she was also arrested for fraud. The rightful heirs got their inheritance, and the so-called widow walked out in handcuffs. Story 27. A teenager was on trial for grand theft auto, accused of stealing a luxury sports car. Security footage showed him speeding down the highway, and police arrested him shortly after the chase. His defense? He claimed he had borrowed the car from a friend. The prosecution presented overwhelming evidence, but then, during testimony, the teen sighed dramatically and muttered, Okay, I'll tell you the truth." The room fell silent. The judge leaned forward. "I wasn't stealing the car. I was trying to return it." Confused, the prosecutor asked him to explain. The teen claimed that he had stolen the car earlier that week but felt guilty and was trying to return it when the cops started chasing him. His lawyer's face turned beet red. The judge just rubbed his temples and sighed. Needless to say, that confession sealed the deal. He was convicted on the spot. Story 28. It was a domestic abuse case. A woman had accused her husband of years of violence, and she had medical records, photos, and testimonies to back up her claims. The husband, smug and confident, sat there denying everything. "She's making it all up," he said. "I never laid a hand on." Then, just as his lawyer was about to finish questioning, the wife pulled out a hidden piece of evidence. A voice recording. She pressed play. The husband's voice filled the court. "Next time, I'll make sure no one finds your body." The air was sucked out of the room. The husband's lawyer immediately asked for a recess. The jury looked horrified. The case was practically over right then and there. The husband, convicted. The wife, finally free. Story 29. A cold case murder trial took a shocking turn when the defendant, a man accused of killing his childhood best friend, sat silently through most of the trial. The evidence was strong. DNA at the scene, motive, and even witness testimony from years ago. But when the prosecution delivered their closing argument, the man suddenly stood up and said, "You've got it all wrong. I didn't kill him alone." The courtroom froze. The defense attorney went pale. The judge allowed him to speak, and he went on to name another person, someone never previously suspected, as his accomplice. He detailed how they had planned the crime together and how that person had actually delivered the fatal blow. Within days, investigators found new evidence linking the second person to the crime. The trial was paused as the new suspect was arrested. The original defendant still went to prison, but he didn't go down alone. Story 30. A wealthy businessman was being sued for sexual harassment by a former employee. She had emails, text messages, and even video evidence of his inappropriate behavior. His lawyers tried to downplay it, arguing that the messages were taken out of context. Then, during cross-examination, the businessman, clearly irritated, blurted out, "So what if I told her I'd ruin her career if she didn't sleep with me? I was joking." The courtroom erupted. His lawyer looked like he wanted to disappear. The judge's eyes widened. That offhanded comment cost him everything. The jury awarded the woman a massive settlement, and his career was effectively over. Story 31. A man was on trial for fraud, accused of running an elaborate Ponzi scheme that scammed dozens of investors out of millions. Throughout the trial, he maintained his innocence, claiming he was simply a bad businessman who had mismanaged funds. Then, during cross-examination, the prosecutor asked him a simple question. "So, where is all the money now?" The defendant smirked, leaned back, and said, "Let's just say, I made sure no one will ever find it." Gasps filled the court. His lawyer turned pale. The judge immediately called for a recess. That one arrogant statement was all the prosecution needed to request further investigations. Within weeks, forensic accountants traced offshore accounts he thought were hidden. Not only was he convicted of fraud, but he also got slapped with additional charges for money laundering and obstruction of justice. His hidden money seized. Story 32. A woman was being sued by her ex-husband for defamation after she publicly accused him of abuse. She had no hard evidence, no police reports, no medical records, just her word against his. The trial was going in his favor, and his smug attitude in court made it seem like he was about to win. Then, in the middle of her testimony, the woman's lawyer casually pulled out a handwritten letter. It was from the ex-husband himself, dated years earlier, apologizing for everything. The judge read the letter. It contained chilling lines like, "I know I hurt you. I don't know why I get so angry." The courtroom fell silent. The ex-husband turned pale, then started shouting that it was fake. But forensic analysis proved it was his handwriting. The defamation case? Immediately thrown out. Within days, authorities opened a criminal investigation against him. Story 33. A doctor was on trial for malpractice after a patient died under suspicious circumstances. He had maintained throughout the trial that it was just a tragic accident. Then, a surprise witness, a former nurse who had worked with him, took the stand. With a shaky voice, she said, "It wasn't an accident. He did it on purpose." Gasps. The doctor's expression darkened. She went on to explain that the doctor had been experimenting with untested medications on patients without their knowledge. She had kept quiet for years out of fear, but when she saw him in court pretending to be innocent, she couldn't stay silent. The defense scrambled to discredit her, but she had brought documents, hidden records she had saved, proving her claims. The doctor went from fighting a malpractice lawsuit to being charged with murder. Story 34. A man was suing his former best friend for stealing his lottery winnings. He claimed he had won a $2 million jackpot, but before he could cash in the ticket, his so-called friend took it and disappeared. The defendant denied everything. There was no way to prove who had originally bought the ticket. Then, just as the trial was about to wrap up, the plaintiff's lawyer played a voicemail recording. In the message, the defendant could be heard laughing and saying, "Dude, you actually think you're getting a dime of this money? I took it, and there's nothing you can do about it." The jury's jaws dropped. The defendant turned bright red. The case was immediately ruled in favor of the plaintiff, and the friend was ordered to return the money plus damages. Story 35. A young woman was on trial for attempted murder after allegedly poisoning her rich elderly husband. She swore she was innocent, claiming he had been sick for a long time. Then, a shocking witness was called, the victim himself. The husband, who everyone thought was dead, rolled into the courtroom in a wheelchair. The defendant's face went white. The courtroom was in chaos. It turned out he had survived the poisoning attempt, and authorities had secretly kept it quiet while they built their case. His testimony sealed her fate. He described how she had been slowly poisoning his food, how she had emptied his bank accounts, and how he had only realized what was happening after a doctor noticed something suspicious in his blood work. The trial ended in minutes. She was sentenced to life in prison. Story 36. A quiet divorce hearing between an upper-class couple took a turn that no one saw coming. The wife was seeking a hefty alimony, claiming she had supported her husband's career and deserved her share. The husband, a successful tech entrepreneur, insisted that she had never contributed to his success. Then, in the middle of testimony, the wife calmly said, "I deserve half, and you know it. After all, I was the one who wrote your company's source code." The courtroom froze. Her husband laughed in disbelief, until her lawyer handed the judge a USB drive. It contained the original source code for the husband's multi-million-dollar software, and the file logs proved she had written. His face turned pale. Within days, the divorce case escalated into a corporate lawsuit, with the wife suing for intellectual property theft. She not only won the divorce settlement, but walked away with partial ownership of his company. Story 37. A man was on trial for an armed home invasion, where an elderly couple had been brutally assaulted. He had pleaded not guilty, claiming he wasn't even in the area when it happened. Then, the prosecutor pulled out a surprise piece of evidence, a stolen smartwatch that the man had accidentally worn during the crime. The courtroom went silent as the prosecutor played the GPS data from the watch. It showed him moving directly to the crime scene at the exact time of the attack. The defendant looked like he wanted to vanish. His own lawyer had no way to explain it. The jury convicted him in record time. Story 38. A woman was suing a major airline after her luggage went missing, claiming they had lost an extremely valuable diamond necklace that was inside her suitcase. The airline denied responsibility, saying she had no proof the necklace was even in the bag. She had an emotional testimony, nearly bringing the jury to tears, until the airline's lawyer calmly pulled up her recent Instagram posts. Just days before the trial, she had posted a selfie wearing the necklace, the same necklace she claimed had been lost months ago. The courtroom erupted. The woman's lawyer sat there stunned as she stammered, trying to explain. The judge dismissed the case on the spot and recommended she be charged with fraud. Story 39. A small-town teacher was on trial for selling exam answers to students. She denied everything, claiming the accusations were fabricated by students who failed her class. Then, one of the students stood up in court and said, "I still have the Venmo receipts." The teacher's face dropped. The student pulled out his phone and showed dozens of digital payment transactions labeled math test and biology answers. Her lawyer had nothing to say. The judge took one look at the evidence and convicted her immediately. Story 40. A wealthy real estate mogul was being sued by a woman who claimed he had promised her a multi-million-dollar inheritance in exchange for years of companionship. She claimed he had tricked her into believing she would be taken care of. The mogul laughed in court, calling her delusional and denying that he had ever made such a promise. Then, her lawyer pulled out a signed napkin. It was a handwritten contract from the mogul himself, stating, "I promised to leave her $5 million in my will." It was signed and dated. The judge ruled in her favor. The mogul had to pay up, and he stormed out of the courtroom furious. Story 41. A well-known socialite was suing her ex-fiancé for the return of a $250,000 engagement ring after he called off the wedding. She argued that since he ended things, she was entitled to keep it. The ex-fiancé, on the other hand, claimed she had been cheating on him throughout the relationship and that the ring was conditional upon marriage. Then, in a twist no one expected, the man's lawyer played a voicemail recording. It was from the woman to another man. In the message, she laughed about how she was playing the long game and would break up with him right after the wedding, but at least the ring will be mine. The courtroom erupted. The judge ruled that the ex-fiancé got to keep the ring, and the socialite left the courtroom humiliated. Story 42. A man was on trial for attempting to set his ex-girlfriend's house on fire. The evidence against him was strong. Gasoline was found near the house, and multiple witnesses saw him lurking in the area. He denied everything and claimed he was being framed. Then, the prosecutor pulled up his internet search history. In front of the whole courtroom, they read out his recent searches. How to start a fire without getting caught. Best accelerants for arson. Can you erase fingerprints from gasoline cans? His own lawyer facepalmed. The jury didn't even need time to deliberate. Guilty. Story 43. A couple was in court over a messy divorce battle. The wife accused the husband of hiding money to avoid giving her a fair settlement. He denied everything, saying he was barely getting by. Then, out of nowhere, the wife's lawyer presented a recent real estate transaction. It showed the husband had secretly purchased a luxury villa in another country, just 2 weeks before filing for divorce. His face went white. Not only did the wife win the divorce case, but the judge increased her settlement as punishment for his deception. Story 44. A man was on trial for stealing rare collectibles from a wealthy collector's estate. He swore up and down that he had never even been inside the house. Then, the prosecutor held up a signed guest book. It was from the victim's house, and the defendant's name was in it. Worse, he had written, "Thanks for the invite. Loved seeing the rare collection." The courtroom erupted in laughter. His lawyer had nothing to say. Verdict? Guilty in minutes. Story 45. A woman was being sued for insurance fraud after claiming that her brand-new luxury car had been stolen. She insisted she had no idea what had happened to it. Then, the insurance company's lawyer pulled up traffic cam footage. It showed her driving the supposedly stolen car to another city, parking it, and walking away. Her jaw dropped. The judge ruled against her immediately, and she was later charged with criminal fraud. Story 46. A high-profile businessman was on trial for insider trading. The prosecution had a strong case, but his defense team argued that he had no way of knowing confidential financial information. Then, the prosecutor played a voicemail, left by the defendant himself. In the recording, the businessman was heard laughing, saying, "They'll never catch me. I made my move before the news even hit the press." The entire courtroom froze. His lawyer's face turned bright red. The judge stared at him for a long moment before saying, "I assume you'd like to change your plea?" The businessman was convicted on the spot. Story 47. A woman was suing her wealthy ex-boyfriend, claiming he had promised to pay off her student loans if she stayed in a relationship with him. She had texts suggesting he would take care of her financially, but he denied making any binding promises. Then, her lawyer pulled out an actual signed contract. Yes, the ex had written out a contract on notebook paper, promising to pay off $75,000 in loans if she stayed with him for at least 5 years. His lawyer tried to argue that it was obviously a joke, but the judge wasn't buying it. Since he had signed and dated the paper, the court ruled that he owed her the money. He tried to laugh it off, but the expression on his face said it all. Story 48. A man was facing charges for breaking into his ex-girlfriend's house. He claimed he had never been near her home on the night of the break-in. Then, the prosecutor presented a picture of him, inside her house, posted on his own social media. The caption? "She'll never know I was here." The courtroom erupted in laughter. The judge shook his head in disbelief. His lawyer tried to argue that it was an old photo, but phone metadata confirmed it was taken on the exact night of the break-in. Verdict? Guilty. Instant. Story 49. A woman was suing a famous influencer for stealing her business idea. The influencer had launched a near-identical product line just months after the woman had pitched her idea privately. The influencer denied ever seeing the woman's concept. Then, the plaintiff's lawyer pulled out a screenshot of the influencer's own email inbox. It showed the influencer had opened the email, containing the business proposal 3 times, weeks before launching her own version. The influencer's face went completely pale. She lost the case instantly and was forced to pay hundreds of thousands in damages. Story 50. A teenager was on trial for stealing a car and crashing it into a storefront. He claimed he had borrowed the car from a friend and wasn't responsible for the damages. Then, the prosecutor played a video from the teen's own TikTok. It showed him bragging about stealing the car, revving the engine, and laughing about how the owner would never see it again. The courtroom was silent for a long moment. The judge sighed and simply said, "Well, that makes my job easy." Guilty. Story 51. A woman was suing her former employer for wrongful termination, claiming she had been fired for reporting unethical behavior within the company. She insisted she was a whistleblower and her firing was retaliation. The company's defense? She was fired for stealing office supplies. It seemed like a weak excuse, until the company's lawyer pulled up security footage from her office. The video showed her loading a company printer into the trunk of her car. Her lawyer turned pale. The judge asked, "Ms. Daniels, were you aware that printers are considered office supplies?" She stammered, trying to explain, but it was too late. The wrongful termination case was dismissed immediately, and she was later charged with theft. Story 52. A man was suing his neighbor, claiming the neighbor's tree had fallen onto his luxury car, causing severe damage. He wanted $100,000 in damages. The neighbor, an elderly man, insisted the tree had not fallen recently and that the car wasn't even there when it happened. Then, the defendant's lawyer pulled up satellite imagery from Google Maps. The images, taken months before the storm, showed the tree had already been down, long before the man's car was parked in the driveway. The courtroom erupted. The plaintiff dropped the lawsuit on the spot and rushed out of the courtroom. The judge was not amused. Story 53. A man was on trial for arson after a fire destroyed his ex-girlfriend's restaurant. He swore he had nothing to do with it and had been nowhere near the scene. Then, The prosecutor presented footage from a gas station security camera. It showed the man, just hours before the fire, buying gasoline, matches, and a ski mask. His lawyer's face went pale. The man tried to say it was just a coincidence. The jury convicted him within an hour. Story 54. A woman was fighting for full custody of her children, claiming her ex-husband was an unfit parent. She accused him of being addicted to drugs and exposing their kids to dangerous situations. Her case was going well until her ex-husband's lawyer pulled out a social media post she had made the night before the trial. The post? A selfie of her at a nightclub holding a drink with the caption, "Drunk as hell but still gotta be in court at 9 a.m. LOL. The judge stared at her. The courtroom erupted. Custody? Awarded to the father. Story 55. A real estate agent was suing a former client for slander, claiming the client had ruined his reputation by posting false accusations online. The client had posted a scathing review, calling him a fraud and a scammer. Then, the agent's lawyer pulled up emails the client had sent to friends. In the emails, the client admitted he had made up the accusations because he was angry about losing a bidding. The jury ruled in favor of the real estate agent, awarding him $500,000 in damages. The client? Financially ruined. Story 56. A woman was on trial for embezzling over $500,000 from the nonprofit she worked. She claimed she was being framed and had never stolen a dime. Her defense was strong until the prosecution pulled up her Amazon purchase history. Listed among dozens of extravagant purchases were things like a $10,000 designer handbag, a $15,000 home theater system, a luxury vacation to the Maldives. Then, the prosecutor asked, "Can you explain how you afforded all this on a $40,000 a year salary?" The woman's face went white. Her lawyer didn't even try to object. She was convicted in record time. Story 57. A bitter custody battle was unfolding in court. The mother accused the father of being an alcoholic who was unfit to care for their children. The father denied everything, claiming he hadn't had a drink in years. Then, the mother's lawyer pulled up a screenshot from the father's own Instagram. It showed him at a bar, holding multiple drinks, with the caption, "Blackout drunk on a Tuesday. Who even needs responsibilities?" The father's lawyer put his head in his hands. The judge awarded full custody to the mother on the spot. Story 58. A young man was on trial for stealing a luxury sports car. He insisted he had no idea the car was stolen and thought it was a rental from a friend. Then, the prosecutor played a video from the defendant's own YouTube channel. In the video, the young man looked directly into the camera and said, "Yo, I just stole this car. This thing is fast as hell." The jury burst out laughing. His lawyer immediately asked for a plea deal. Story 59. A woman was suing her ex-business partner for stealing her brand idea and launching a copycat company. The defendant denied everything, claiming she had come up with the idea on her own. Then, the plaintiff's lawyer pulled up text messages from before they split. In one, the defendant literally texted the plaintiff, "If I ever screw you over and steal this idea, don't take it personal." The courtroom erupted. The judge ruled in favor of the plaintiff, awarding her full ownership of the brand and damages. Story 60. A man was on trial for assault, accused of punching another man at a bar. His defense? He swore he never threw a punch. Then, the prosecutor played security footage. It showed the defendant bragging to his friends just minutes before the fight. His exact words? "Watch this. I'm about to knock this guy out." The jury took less than an hour to convict him. Story 61. A wealthy businessman was on trial for tax fraud, accused of hiding millions in offshore accounts. He insisted he was completely innocent and had never tried to evade taxes. Then, the prosecutor pulled out a handwritten note found in his office safe. It read, "Move the rest of the money to the Cayman account before the IRS finds it." The businessman's face went pale. His lawyer tried to argue that the note didn't prove intent. The judge just stared at him and said, "Are you serious?" The businessman was convicted on the spot. Story 62. A woman was suing her landlord for eviction without cause. She claimed she had always paid rent on time and was wrongfully kicked out. The landlord insisted she was evicted because she trashed the apartment. Then, he pulled out TikTok videos, posted by the tenant herself, showing her throwing wild parties in the apartment, spray painting the walls, and even saying, "My landlord's going to be so mad when he sees this." The judge dismissed the case immediately. Story 63. A professional athlete was suing his former agent, claiming he had been cheated out of millions. He insisted his agent had stolen money and made bad investments without his knowledge. Then, the agent's lawyer pulled up an old interview clip of the athlete on TV. In it, he was bragging about how he had personally signed off on every investment. His exact words? My agent just gives advice, but I make all the final decisions. The athlete sat there silent as his own words destroyed his case. The judge ruled in favor of the agent.